Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Social Club at the End of the World. And we're still largely, but not entirely, focused on Guy McPherson's latest predictions. That's taking us into a lot of interesting directions that we'll touch on today. I want to welcome Dan in Chicago and Jason in Long Beach, California. I'm in Seattle, Washington. And we are the Social Club at the End of the World. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you guys. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go on mute and let Dan and Jason say hello. And then, Jason, if you want to lead with your first topic, which is a Chris Hedges article that's a very interesting one. Let you read from that, and then we'll get into it. And then after that, we'll talk about arcology and hoarding. And then finally, we'll talk about a concept that I and others have been incubating the last several days called Noah's arcology. With a K. All right, back on to you guys.
Okay, I'll jump in first so that Jason can, after saying hi, he can go to the topic that we're going to start with. Well, I'm coming from Chicago. We're having quite a winter here, and definitely in my mind connected to climate change and, of course, all the things going on around the world. Weather-wise, we really never hear about it at all, so that whatever local weather there is, you don't hear what's going on elsewhere. And also, just to let people know, I am recovering from a pretty severe rotator cuff tear. I'm still kind of semi-disabled, believe it or not, and it's causing me to have greater empathy than I ever had for people who are disabled and have to deal with it long term. This is just initially a 6-week recovery with the sling. So I'm ready to go. Glad to be here. And I'm going to go ahead and mute out and let Jason take off.
Well, I was going to say, I understand what you're talking about the empathy for the recovery. When I broke my leg, I think I mentioned that as well, that you never realize, like, breaking a limb or like being handicapped or in a lot of pain, what that really does to a person. Really made me kind of, you're like depressed in a stupor, especially if you're taking all the drugs that they give you. So anyways, I'm just going to lead into this Chris Hedges article. I just feel like I've always liked the way Chris Hedges writes things and talks about things. He sort of talks about how there was like a corporate coup d'etat 30 or 40 years ago is when it really began. You can look more into his content to learn about that. But sometimes I like to look at his reaction at the end of this, climate change article and kind of see, what conversation it started with us. So, can you all see the screen?
Yeah, we can see it. We can see it.
Okay. Yeah. So we can't fight climate change if we keep lying to ourselves. It is about 6 or 7 months old. The sun sets at Juliet, Georgia, behind the coal-fired facility known as Plantbased, one of the nation's top carbon dioxide emitters. We must embrace a despair that unflinchingly acknowledges the bleak future that will be created by climate change. We must see in any act of resistance, even if it appears futile, a moral victory. African Americans understand, in a way perhaps only the oppressed can grasp, that our character and dignity will be measured by our ability to name and resist the malignant forces that seem to hold us in a death grip. Catastrophic climate change is inevitable. Our technology and science will not save us. The future of humanity is now in peril. At best, we can mitigate the crisis. We cannot avert it. We are fighting for our lives. If we do not rapidly build militant movements of sustained revolt, movements willing to break the law and attack the structure of the corporate state, we will join the 99% of species that have vanished since life first appeared on Earth. And then anybody can go ahead and read this whole article for themselves. But when he kind of, at the end, he does mention methane in here at one point. But his sort of call to action at the end, I thought, was interesting. And I just kind of want to read that. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. Historian Howard Zinn wrote, "It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. The inability to see what is in front of our eyes replicates the blindness of all past civilizations that celebrated their eternal glory at moments of precipitous decline. The difference is that life across the whole planet will go down this time. It is comforting to pretend this is not happening, to foster false hopes, and to fool ourselves with the myth of human progress. But these illusions only tranquilize us at a moment when we should be rising in collective fury against those who are orchestrating our doom." And that was a quote from Howard Zinn right before that. But I think that he just has always has good input on things. And I don't know if you guys want to just chime in on that, what you thought about that. I was just going to look for another portion of this article.
Yeah, I mean, the quoted and the author of the article, Chris Hedges, are stating in very cogent, poetic terms what we've been talking about all along, and that is we need to do something utterly radical. Something absolutely radical needs to shift. Radical in the sense that it gets to the root of the problems, because for all the environmental movements, political movements, revolutions, etc., the growth in emissions is a constant. The destruction of the biosphere is a constant. It's just been getting worse. It's been nothing but bad news, no good news. So that's what leads me to radical strategies such as planetary arcologies as a means of saving some fraction of life rather than watching it all go down the toilet. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. That basically I'm in total agreement with what they're saying, and it's very consistent with what we've been saying all along. Going on mute.
Yeah, and I would add there's a really good interview between where Chris Hedges is interviewing, and I hope I got the guy's name right, Tim DeChristopher, who's an environmental activist who was imprisoned, I believe, for a couple of years. and they're talking, and it's a very serious, mature discussion. And they do bring up briefly, as I recall, the possibility that we are looking at near-term human extinction, and then kind of asking themselves, is this something that people can deal with? Is this something people can handle should it come about? And I would just recommend that to everybody. And I'll say one more thing about Chris Hedges. He is somebody who has been out there for decades. He's spent a lot of time on the front lines, war correspondent. He's really done the work. And others have also been there for a long time. Unfortunately, we still are up against this kind of wall of disinformation, propaganda put out in our population here in the United States, obviously elsewhere, where authority figures are telling you their narrative of what is going on in the world, what is true, what should be ignored, what's a conspiracy theory, what's ridiculous. And the people who are controlling this narrative are very, very sophisticated. Their understanding of human psychology is top level, and their understanding of how to use propaganda effectively is also top level. So we do at some point have to ask the question, look, Chris Hedges and many others are explaining things in a very rational, valid way, yet their voices are relatively censored. And that this represents a problem. If I can't hear Chris Hedges and others like Chris Hedges regularly, who am I going to get my information from? Am I going to get it from Sean Hannity on Fox, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, Anderson Cooper on CNN, all authority figures? And I might say, of course, the one thing that they won't talk about, whether it's Hannity and Fox or Anderson Cooper on CNN or any of the others that Chris Hedges is always talking about, is how corporations are responsible, and their interests in making money and profits are responsible for so much of the damages that are constantly occurring and have now mounted up to a point where it just simply may be too late to really do anything to preserve the planet and human life. And as long as corporations cannot be mentioned because they fund the mass media, and the mass media, these are authority figures. I just want to go off on a little brief tangent. It's very connected with it, but I want to put it out right here. When we are children, we have to listen to our authority figures. Usually that's our parents. It could be teachers when we're in school, could be older siblings, but there's usually a network of authority figures that as children we listen to. They tell us what's true, what's false, what's safe, what's dangerous, and hopefully 75 or 80% of what they tell us is useful. But the thing is, we are hardwired to accept what they tell us as being the way it is, and we're not going to question it. In other words, they imprint us with beliefs. And once you're imprinted with a belief, you will have easy access to information that confirms the belief. As a child, you don't have any information, so you just take it in. Or you will have difficulty accessing information that contravenes, goes against the belief. And if anything comes your way, you'll have a tendency to minimize or rationalize it away. So when you're listening to Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow or Anderson Cooper, they are essentially giving you as authority figures the way the world is. Chris Hedges is also can be an authority figure, but he's not out there. He is relatively censored, not completely, but still relatively censored. And I just want to give a personal example of how, in a way, some of this stuff gets perpetuated. Actually, let me come back to that. I think I've said enough right now. I see Doctress Newtopia has joined the discussion. How are you, Doctress? I'm just going to let you say hi, and then I'll jump in later with some other stuff.
Welcome, Doctress.
Yeah, I've just been talking to the solar energy folks, and it looks like I'm going to go ahead with it to get solar panels on my rooftop. So then I'll be able to actually get an electric car at some point. And because I want to get off the nukes, I want to get off the solar company. I know this is not the answer. The answer is not the single family house. The answer is not solar power. The answer is not cars. But it's a step. I don't know what else to do. This is what I can do. And solar panels are better than the alternative of the fossil fuel industry. And having an electric car that I'm charging up on my solar panels is better than going to the gas pump. And so that's my decision on that. You never know if you're doing the right thing or if this is the right thing to invest in. But I think what has happened to the solar companies are leaving Arizona.
Yeah, Doctress, I just want to jump in because, this particular meeting of the social club at the end of the world is being broadcast in real time live. So you just want to be aware. We discussed that before. We said, let's go do it. I just want you to be aware of that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're both, just to add to that, we're both recording and broadcasting live. We currently have 8 viewers. It's been climbing. So hello, everyone. Hello to our viewers. We're really glad you're joining us, and as well to those who are watching this after we record. Back to you, Doctress. And Jason was also about to shift into another topic pertaining to arcologies and hoarding. But anyway, back to you, Doctress.
Yeah, so, what the electric companies are doing is that they are doing away with this program called net metering. And what that means is that people that have solar power on their roof, they can get credits for selling electricity back to the companies. And so that makes solar panels on rooftops very economical, because it really, if you're using more energy than you're creating, you get those points that later you can use towards your bill. Now, the power companies don't like that. And so that's why they're stopping these programs. If I go ahead with solar energy now, then I get grandfathered in with the net metering. So anybody after this, I think it's, the end of this month, if you're not signed up, then you cannot get net metering. That's how evil this system is. That it is stopping and blocking progressive things from happening.
Yeah, and just to jump in the service of corporate profits, essentially, for those who really benefit from that. Yeah, just another good example.
Well, it's the whole thing. If you look at the solar energy, what's happened to it, like I can also get like $5,000 worth of tax credits, but I don't make enough money to even use those tax credits. So it's again, it's geared to those who have. If you pay enough taxes, and you get this rebate. If you don't pay those taxes, and you don't get that rebate. And it's this money is holding us back, and you know, yeah, like you said, the whole profit mode. But it was interesting today how much water you save by going solar, because in Arizona, the company is using coal, and coal actually takes a lot of water because they're doing the same thing as nuclear power. And what they do is they make steam to run the turbines to make the electricity. So he showed me how much water I would be saving the power company by having the solar power rooftop. So it's environmental just with the amount of water that you save.
Well, I mean, you're doing something good. I mean, I don't own a home. I live in an apartment building that already has solar on it. So I tell myself good things about myself and pat myself on the back for that.
I like that.
I also am trying now to grow as much food as I possibly can, because I want to try to see how much food it would take for me to have a lot of food, for me to consider like, wow, I grew a lot of food. So right now I'm trying to like grow as much food as possible. But I think, you know, whatever you can do to get away from the fossil fuel industry is a productive thing. And you know, that brings me to this other little section, which I'll share on the Chris Hedges article, which I kind of just wanted to read this one last paragraph. The nonprofit Project Drawdown, which compiles research from an international coalition of scientists, says that a plant-based diet may be the most effective way an individual can stop climate change. Adopting such a diet should be our first act of revolt. The second should be carrying out civil disobedience to disrupt the extraction of fossil fuels, along with massively reducing our consumption of those fuels. The third, through mass mobilization, should be to overthrow the corporate state and nationalize the energy sector, the banking industry, utilities, and public transportation, in addition to dismantling a war machine that, in waging futile and unwinnable wars, consumes nearly half of all government expenditures. It is a lot to demand, but if we do not succeed, the human race will disappear. And so that's pretty much all I wanted to read from there. But I was just thinking, I mean, I think sometimes I go to him to see what he's laying out or proposing. And I think that I've tried to actually cut down the amount of meat that I eat, and I haven't gone full vegetarian or vegan. I have like vegan nights that I eat too, at a friend's house. But, you know, I guess I was just, for the sake of bringing on conversation, wondering what people thought about that. I was also thinking, he sort of says we need to quit using fossil fuels as quickly as possible. You know, and we've talked about wondering whether we'd need to actually prepare. Would need to prepare civilization possibly first for the increase in temperature we would feel if we were to stop the dimming effect, the aerosol dimming effect. Because as soon as we turn off all the machinery, civilization the planet would heat up really greatly right away. So I was wondering whether whether that has to be more organized, or what we do with that. Like, if we've reached a point of no return, how do we handle that situation versus just cutting off the engines? Like, maybe we would have to learn how to grow food in controlled environments so that, you know, we weren't so dependent on the wheat and the corn that's being grown outside before we actually turned off like the aerosol dimming effect. So anyways, I'll just open it up for discussion there.
Yeah, you know, so if we look at the possibilities. One possibility is kind of what Guy McPherson hypothesizes, that no matter what gets done, it's essentially highly probable that it's too late. That's one thing that could happen if he is correct. Another possibility, which people like Peter Wadhams and other climatologists suggest, that there are very expensive interventions that could be utilized to perhaps refreeze the Arctic and to essentially draw down the excessive greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Very expensive. I think I heard Peter Wadhams on an interview, maybe even a couple of years ago, talking to Tom Hartman on his RT television show, that unless that you would be necessary to pull money out of these military budgets in order to be able to finance the kinds of interventions. So that is another possibility. You know, it's kind of, I mean, I'm just talking in a very general way. There's the Guy McPherson, highly probable, there's not a thing we could do. There's the Peter Wadhams idea that we could utilize very expensive interventions to preserve the planet. And then there's this third, hypothesis or possibility, that actually we don't need to do very much other than make kind of individual changes. Maybe we can get some policy changes and move off of the fossil fuels, etc. In other words, it's a hypothesis, whether it's coming from someone like Donald Trump, who says, the whole thing is a Chinese hoax to get economic advantage, or it just comes from, don't worry, we still have lots of time to implement changes. So you kind of have these three possibilities, and I think it's important for people to understand the evidence, the what supports or contravenes, goes against these various hypotheses, and to have people be able to discuss it. If I were to become just totally, again, I remember some months ago, I went to a 350.org meeting in Chicago. I had been having a long email conversation with a woman who, very aware, PhD, connected with public health, and she was saying she hated Guy McPherson, felt like, for me that was the wrong avenue to be going down, and she invited me to attend to 350.org. This was something more sane and rational. I did attend that meeting in Chicago, and it was attended primarily by very well-meaning. Most of the people were relatively young, in their 20s, maybe still in graduate school, some of them. There were some who were middle-aged, but there was absolutely no real awareness, assimilated awareness, that there's other hypotheses out there. There's the Guy McPherson hypothesis, and then there is the, say, Peter Wadhams approach, which something must be done right away or you get Guy McPherson. They just simply do not believe that those other two hypotheses are really valid. And so then you get all of the energy tied up with making individual changes like we're talking about now, which are great and would be needed as you go forward in the future, no matter what. But to not understand that you have the Guy McPherson and the Peter Wadhams hypotheses and possibilities. Otherwise, you're just going to be victimized. You better hope that the Donald Trump, you got plenty of time to do something stuff is correct. That's where you're rolling the dice on that, and that just doesn't seem smart to me.
Do you, Dan, think that the people who fall into that category, like the 350.orgers and some of the other people who are, on that, in that level that you're talking about there, do you think they're just as bad or less bad or worse than like deniers? Because in a way, I feel like there's people who believe it out there, but they believe we have this massive time schedule to deal with it, like within. They don't see how bad and how, deep we seem to be.
Yeah, I do think they are very problematic because, in a sense, anybody who is not going to look at the Guy McPherson or the Peter Wadhams hypotheses, therefore, it's just like, it's like you're living in a condition where, let's go out and have a rain dance. Maybe that will bring down the rain, kind of a thing. It's unrealistic to not consider these other possibilities. How can you come up with decisions if you don't have information? Or, and this is where I guess we really could differentiate well-meaning people very focused on necessary changes in individual lifestyles from people like Donald Trump and his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and the Exxon Corporation and the Heartland Institute here in Chicago, who essentially shills in part for the energy industry, a think tank is how I think they advertise themselves. They educate people like Donald Trump. Again, Donald Trump does not have a background in science, and it has never been something which I imagine he's been particularly interested in. He's been interested in making money. He's a money hoarder type of person, and that's what he's been about. So who is he going to take as his authority figure to explain something like Guy McPherson or what's going on with climate change? He's going to listen to Rex Tillerson, the energy company academic shills, this kind of person, and that's who he's going to believe. I think last week we were talking, and again, I still don't remember his name. The guy from Princeton who's a physicist, very well respected as a physicist, but he tends to shill for energy companies, I believe. And he spouts out that you don't need to worry about climate change. Donald Trump will gladly listen, and other people, to someone like that. But if we can't have a debate where we see authority figures who have different ideas about what's happening, debating those authority figures that are essentially controlling the narrative for so many, how do you go forward? And Guy McPherson has been out there for a long time. Peter Wadhams has been getting more active. He was, I believe, threatened and intimidated, and probably decided, reality on the ground, I'd better shut up somewhat. I'd better be careful where I go. But this is a problem for everyone. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute out. Let whoever.
Well, I will say this kind of segues us into hoarding a little bit, which we were going to talk about. Sort of the moral issues that may come about in collapse. I see it sometimes come up, like when we're talking about which way to do it. And I think, like doctors sort of pointed out, well, if you're creating an arcology and you have to protect yourself with guns, that it's not the type of society that she would expect brings the change that we need. So I thought it would be an interesting conversation to talk about morality in the end times. Just for example, like if you know a bunch of deniers, when it comes time that they need help because their houses and whole area have been destroyed by a hurricane or whatever it may be, you know, do you hoard to keep yourself alive? Is that morally okay or not? And so I'm just kind of opening it up to going towards hoarding, and we can have that conversation. But I think personally, I think that, Peter Wadhams, a lot of these people like Guy McPherson have seen, like, they've been trying to talk about this message, like, hey, wake up, everybody. This is really dire. And no one's been listening for so long. So at a certain point, they get kind of just like, well, at this point, it seems like it's over, because I don't think people have the capacity for waking up and realizing what's going on. And if those are your assumptions, you'd have to assume that we're going to reach the point of collapse without people really waking up, and they may stay unwoken up until they starve to death or whatever it may be. So.
And again, to go back to the authority figure influence in our country anyway, people watch the nightly news, whether it's, AB, whatever it is. Those, as they sometimes are referred to as talking heads, they represent authority figures for most of the population. Some of them love Sean Hannity. Others love Rachel Maddow. They give different narratives, but they agree on one thing. We must never emphasize corporate responsibility and influence for what is going on, because if they do, they will not be in their wonderful positions of influence. And so as long as the narratives are controlled by the corporations, it's a real problem. Chris Hedges isn't out there every night, like these others, talking about things. He does have, I think, once a week show on Russia Today, that network, which, of course, in my opinion, is a really good network in terms of their presentation of what's going on around the world. But they, right now, they are in danger of being seriously censored, and they may already be instituting the self-censorship that people rely on to prevent a total censorship or other kinds of penalties. But it's a huge problem. And I'll just say one more thing about the ethical issue of if you're in a situation where there's not enough food to go around, and if a population has not discussed seriously what is it that we do, how are decisions made? I think maybe last week or some other couple weeks ago, I was mentioning the issue at Fukushima, where I believe that it was highly dangerous for a human being to go down there and inspect the damage. And I think they came to a conclusion that people who are older, who have already lived a life and had the necessary skills to do that, compared to someone who was younger who also had the skills, it would be an altruistic thing to do to have the older people expose themselves to possibly death from radiation exposure. And I know how, when I was working for public health, at a certain point, Chicago Department of Public Health received a pretty good inflow of money to combat bioterrorism. And I remember talking about kind of how dangerous that was. I mean, I'll give you an example. Initially we were getting trained to be prepared for a bioterror attack, and we were going to have these kind of centers set up where people who were sick, they could come to the center. And then initially, it's changed over time, but the initial proposal was someone like myself, who was a therapist, would man, kind of the front line of somebody coming into the center. And I would have a list of the symptoms of whatever the disease was. And then I would make a decision. You go see the doctors and nurses, or you go into this other area because you do not have those symptoms. And just, it's kind of like you'll wait there. And I said, well, all you ever talk about in your examples is if the bioterror attack was anthrax, which is not contagious. But what about all the situations where you're going to be attacked, if it does happen, with a contagious disease? And am I going to be standing there with a mask on and exposing myself to this? And I would bring that up, and I would say, can't you at least offer people who are going to put themselves in frontline jeopardy to have insurance policies? Can't you at least do that? And they weren't really able to go there. And I found, for whatever reasons, the inability to talk about things realistically was a real problem. I remember a lot of colleagues and other people in public health department, people would just off the top of their head say, you know what, if that happens and they call me to come in, I'm going to be unavailable. I got to take care of my family. I'm not going in. But what they had as an ultimate plan was, if something like this did happen, everybody would be ordered to participate who they felt was necessary. And if you didn't, at a minimum, you'd lose your job. You could even have serious legal penalties, perhaps, against you if you ignored the order. And there was no ability to discuss that. And I have to believe the reason they didn't want to discuss it in a realistic way is because they felt that if this kind of stuff got out, it would be, very, very problematic. And it seems like people are always willing to censor or self-censor because they're afraid of the consequences. And at this point in time, it just seems extremely harmful. And I'm going to go ahead and mute out and pass it on.
I had an interesting thing happen to me over the weekend. I had to take a first aid and a CPR training. And I got on I was thinking at the end of this first aid, there is nothing in that training to do with nuclear war. And what do we do in that kind of situation where we have all these people who are going to need major first aid? Just nothing of that magnitude was in the training. Well, then I looked on my cell phone and it said, there is a ballistic missile coming into Hawaii, and I'm going, oh my gosh, then of course it was a false alarm. And I think that is where, personally, that's where I'm going to focus my energy, is on the whole concept of world peace. That's what we need more than anything else, is to diminish these huge military budgets. It's not just the United States, it's other military budgets as well, but particularly the United States, and put that money into building the arcologies. That, to me, is the really only way to go. The other way is you want to get a billionaire, to sponsor it. Well, then it's going to be the billionaire, and it's going to be whoever he decides, and I'm going to say he decides who is going to be the ones that get to live in the arcology. So I think for me, I have gotten even more this week involved in my essay to Chomsky about nuclear weapons. What can we do about it? Nuclear waste. And last night I stayed up and started reading about WIPP, WIMP, Does anybody know about that? Okay, nobody's heard about it. Well, that's where it's a depository for nuclear waste in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And for many years, they've been shipping waste on our highway from defense laboratories and other reactors, military reactors, to Carlsbad, outside of Carlsbad, about 20 miles, to this depository. And they bury it. The waste is buried. And in 2014, they had an accident. So this shows that it doesn't even work. And several of the containers, or one container, caught on fire, leaked radiation, and the officials say, oh, it didn't get out to the public. Part of the mine, because that's what they're doing, they're putting the radioactive containers in a mine. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission doesn't oversee this. They oversee like what they want to do with Yucca Mountain, put the waste into a depository in Yucca Mountain, Nevada. That's a whole different thing. And the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy is in charge of this Carlsbad. So, and then of course I've been looking at the work of Joanna Macy, and she brilliantly says we don't need to bury nuclear waste. Out of sight, out of mind does not work for millions of years while this radioactive stuff decays into a stable atomic structure. And so anyway, I just think it's back to that idea of world peace that is so critically important for climate change, for the end of poverty, for redistribution of wealth. It's the idea of peace, and that's what we need more than anything else.
And linking to what Jason was saying about the ethical questions when you have shortages of resources where there isn't enough to sustain a population. The issue of what is going to happen if, let's say, Guy McPherson, Peter Wadham's type hypotheses are correct. We do not have a great amount of time. And there's not a willingness to take the money and put it into strategies to draw down the greenhouse gases, refreeze the Arctic. So if those things aren't going to occur, I just want to lay out another little conceptual framework here. I think I mentioned last week that some people believe that what is being planned is that the only really effective way to quickly refreeze the Arctic, which is essential, would be to set off a bunch of nuclear bombs, perhaps some of them in volcanoes, to get enough particulates up into the atmosphere such that the Arctic would refreeze in other adjacent areas. But that is presented in a sense of within the context of the elites in the military, the corporate elites, etc., the intelligence community elites would allow global runaway warming, heating, exponential climate change, however you want to refer to it, to essentially kill off much of the populations that exist in the world. And then the wealthy elites would go down into underground bunkers, very elaborate, around the world, perhaps some of them located in parts of the globe that would be relatively maybe immune from parts of the nuclear winter, but wherever, then they would be able to stay in their shelters for a period of maybe 14 to 16 months, and then they could reemerge. And actually, the radiation by that time would have limited danger in vast parts of the world. That is a hypothesis which is actually being discussed. I have no idea whether it's valid, but I think to consider what ethically what that means. That means that you would have a bunch of people who are in a position to be able to protect themselves and their families from the devastation of exponential climate change. And they would elect to let others just simply die. That's something that could be discussed now. Maybe it's not something which would happen, but given human nature and what a lot of people appear to be thinking about, it's something that could be discussed. I would much prefer than that, because I'll certainly be one of the people who, and all of my loved ones will be gone. But I would much prefer see a Peter Wadhams kind of strategy be employed. And I think the Social Club at the End of the World has kind of taken that perspective. If there's anything that could be done, let's try to have it unfold, rather than just simply throwing in the towel. So that, metaphorically. And so I think there are these ethical things which need to be answered. And there's many societies, there's many historically people who have been exposed to conditions where you have to make kind of decisions about that. And I think it would be great to discuss it, because if it just comes down to just reactivity, you might end up getting, as we've said here, Mad Max, Soylent Green, types of strategies. And ethically as human beings, we have to ask ourselves, is that something I want to sign on to? Actually, if I was given a choice to live in a kind of a Soylent Green type of world or a Mad Max type of world, I would prefer just as Jason, you brought up that movie, The Road. I would prefer do what the wife did, just, hey, I'm checking out. I don't want to be a part of this kind of a world and this kind of activity. So I think, people could think about, if they understood what kind of real environment we're in, what it is they might want to do, how they would want to go. Is that good for me? I want to be, in a Soylent Green world or a Mad Max world trying to survive, killing other people, taking what they have. Is that what I want to do? Or would I prefer just simply leave that world and hope that maybe I'll be transported to a better place, as they say, or not? But, just simply, those are things people can think about. And I think if they're discussed, people can draw conclusions or start to contemplate how they might want to behave in those circumstances, rather than just suddenly having it be right upon you. And all you can do is react emotionally in whatever way you can. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute out.
All right. Now, Jason, you had brought up, excuse me, the topic of hoarding and arcology and how they pertain. Have you discussed what you want to discuss about that? You're on mute, Jason. You're on mute, Jason.
What I was getting to, I guess, was that that I guess I don't know. I mean, I guess we kind of covered it. I was just sort of saying that even at a certain point, though, if you make like a Homer's arcology, like you were kind of suggesting, don't the people in, even if they don't see themselves amongst the wealthy elite, you know, a group of people, whether it's us or from the tech industry, create a way to sort of grow food after the catastrophe and hide underground as well. You know, there's still going to be a lot of sort of letting people starve to death, and so you know that I think there's a lot of big moral scale here on what you know really happens. The doctor says she thinks that she wants to focus on world peace and trying to get the world to be peaceful. I'm thinking along the lines of, I think people just need food. I think there needs to be a growing system of food that's, you know, one way of approaching it too would be, you know, we could free up a lot of agricultural land to do carbon, you know, sequestration projects and have that harmful process of the petroleum monoculture agriculture thing going on. If we could literally start growing a lot more of the food that cities require, if you look at somebody like, you know, Derek Jensen, who talks about the reason why civilization is going to fail is because it's unsustainable. So working at having a test site, like we've talked about, where you can actually grow food and figure out how that can be done in an urban setting so that, you know, big projects could be taken on in agricultural areas to start sequestering carbon, if that's even an option at this point. I don't know. But if we're going to have big projects to sequester carbon, you know, I think. So anyways, I was just sort of thinking along the lines of, you know, then if we fail at waking up the masses, right? I mean, world peace is a really nice image. Feeding all the people in the world is a really nice image. But if you end up lying on this thing where there's only a handful of people who really come to terms with this and decide, well, we want to survive. In a way, the moral thing about that too is you're sort of just letting everybody else die because you only have so much room in these things that you build for yourselves, whether they're actual boats like arcs in the ocean or bunkers in the ground or arcologies that are sealed off from the atmosphere because it may get so fucking hot humans would die. You know, definitely we know our food's gonna die, so that's why I'm sort of saying food. But you know, I was just thinking of these different, you know, is that then not another way of hoarding? What happens when everybody outside is starving to death, you know? So I don't know. And I like when Dan talks about these, you know, the issue of like, you know, older people sort of saying, okay, you know, maybe we should go and work in the nuclear power plant and take it down. I think that's a great idea. I just think selling that to the American baby boomers, for instance, like, hey, you guys who've been somewhat of the most selfish group of individuals who have only voted for your own self-interest throughout your entire lives and most of you don't even really see climate change as real, that you guys should sign up and give up your livelihoods now to dismantle nuclear power plants and grow trees and sequester carbon. I think that they'd be like, fuck you. But, you know, so I'm just saying, you know, if worse comes to worse, then, you know, I think there are some moral issues with locking yourself in an arcology, you know, why everybody else out there just withers away. So that's all.
Yeah, well, and go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. The way I see it, there are huge moral issues no matter what course we take. There are huge moral issues with business as usual, which is causing the sixth mass extinction and, in fact, abrupt climate change, which may lead to all of our extinction. So no matter what we do, there are huge moral issues. And I think what we need to do as a group, as a community, is to say, okay, out of all the scenarios that we talk about and envision, what are the scenarios which of those are actually practical, right? Where we can actually get some headway in a short period of time, because our window of survival is rapidly closing. The amount of time we have left to live is rapidly diminishing. And, do we want to spend the rest of our time just kind of discussing interesting theoretical possibilities, such as, world peace or ending world hunger? These are interesting theoretical possibilities at this point, insofar as I haven't heard one practical plan for how to actually get there from here, right? So do we want to spend the rest of our day?
You haven't been hearing what I've been saying, Jamin. Go ahead.
Okay. I've been listening. You're probably right. I probably haven't been hearing and whatnot. I'll grant you that. But what I'm saying is, we have so little time left that we may want to, take stock of what is practically achievable in the amount of time that we have left, and say, which of these strategies do we want to go for, or do we just want to keep talking? I'm nothing wrong with talking, but I would really love to see us, our group and the broader community, converge on a strategy, a plan to do something meaningful in the time that's left. And of course, I've been advocating for that something meaningful be that we precisely build a network of arcologies to shut down the nuclear power plants and preserve something, as much as possible, of life on Earth that possibly can be saved, right? That's what I'm advocating for. But I'd love to just kind of take a few minutes even and just kind of have this high-level discussion. What should we be aiming for, and what's practically achievable? And doctors, if you'd like to clarify what you've been saying, especially what you think I've been missing, I'm all ears.
Yeah, well, I've been talking about the network of arcologies before you have, so that's one thing. And, how to make one arcology is a very interesting dilemma. And
could take years.
I think it takes a superpower. This is my conclusion after all these years, is that it needs a superpower to be able to build an arcology. So how do we get that superpower? And, is it the billionaire? Is it a mass movement to do that? Is it a revolution? These are questions that I ask about how to do it. Now, if you look at how they built the Biosphere 2, because that is a closed structure, that was the billionaire. That was Ed Bass. And now it's been taken over by the University of Arizona. But now it's no longer, what they're doing now, they're experimenting with how to live on Mars. And they have agricultural experiments going on how to live on Mars. And, NASA is also doing experiments on how to live on Mars. These arcology things, you have to have a closed biosphere in order to live in an inhospitable environment.
Like the future Earth sounds like it's going to be?
It could be, we could end up like Venus, so yeah, you need the container for an inhospitable environment, whether it could be the future Earth or whether it's living in outer space on a colony that's circling the Earth or on another planet.
Are you building these arcologies to be sealed tight, weather resistant to disastrous weather, and able to produce its own biosphere inside, or its own atmosphere? Because if worst case scenario, if we've already gone off the tipping point and there is no return, the only way it seems like to keep the human species alive, or anything alive for that matter, would be like looking at the way you'd have to live on Mars. You know, I mean, and that's the picture that at least Guy McPherson paints for me. Because
well, that's why the biosphere 2 was created, because they were similar to what we've been talking about, and what is motivating Jamin at this point with his vision is the apocalyptic vision. You know, that there's going to be a nuclear holocaust, or there's going to be climate change or whatever. So we need to be able to survive, and we need this kind of closed biosphere in order to survive.
Doctors, have you seen the global dimming, BBC global dimming documentary that Jamin was talking about?
I've seen, I know what global dimming is, and yes, I have seen, I don't know if I've seen that one, but I know about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'm just saying, short of us actually waking up the mass public and getting the government to cut military spending and people to unite around the world on solving the climate change issue, short of really massive mobilization in the next few years, year or two.
Yeah.
We're going to see
well,
that.
Well, you know what? I mean, I came to this group. I wrote the letter to Guy McPherson saying, yeah, we need a test site. We need, you know, this could be a way that humanity could survive. And he said, oh yeah, he knows this very famous or very wealthy man, Jamin Shigley. He wants to be able to build, you know, to survive or whatever. So I had to get Dr. McPherson to give me Jamin, the billionaire's email, so that I could send him my proposal that originally was written to Guy McPherson. Okay. Why? Because I went, oh, maybe Jamin is an enlightened billionaire, and he has enough money to actually build an arcology. You know, so that's my original focus, is to find, you know, some kind of billionaire who can hire the architects and the engineers to be able to do something like this. You know, can survey the land. Where is the appropriate place to build a test site? You know, because if our government is not going in this direction, then it needs to be private funding. I mean, ideally, it should be our government.
Yeah, you know, just a couple of thoughts. You know, these, you know, billionaires, yeah, the idea of billionaires is kind of problematic in my mind, because the billionaires, which are now, again, part of the authority figure realm, they are, to some degree, they're a manifestation of the money hoarding problem. And let me just say a couple of things about this. So I'll give you an example. You know, I, back in 2015, in the summer of 2015, I was part of a hoarding task force representing Chicago Department of Public Health, and it was sponsored by some Chicago aldermen. And I created a presentation on hoarding from a psychological, emotional management point of view. In that presentation, I had 4 slides. I had one of an indoor hoard, one of an outdoor hoard, one of a public storage hoard, and then I had one, which I think I've mentioned before, but I labeled it the British Petroleum Koch Brothers Pet Coke Hoard, which constituted a severe public health problem for people on the southeast side of the city, which was abutting against this pet coke dust. Now, the city of Chicago and the Department of Public Health had been in discussion with community advocates for some time. And there was some very slow progress being made, and there was some concrete accomplishments that had occurred. But it was a struggle. a real advocacy fight struggle. So when I did my presentation, the very next day, there were many, it was well received, well attended for a public health presentation. There were lots of media requests. They wanted to talk to me. I was told right away, I'm not allowed to talk to any of the media. That has to be referred to the public information officer. And the public information officer had only one question for me. What did I say about the British Petroleum Koch brothers slide? And I was really stunned, even though, you know, I'm not somebody who's naive. I just didn't think that was going to actually happen. And actually at the presentation, which was attended by, you know, some people in the ward office, you know, I just said, City of Chicago had been working with the community and some progress had been made. I understood that was not something within the time frame and what I was really focusing on, I was going to be talking about. And then I had another presentation scheduled for what's the actually in the ward, the 10th ward of the City of Chicago, which is most affected by this pet coke dust, which is very toxic. So they then told me that and there's, without going into a lot of the details, essentially that in order for me to do the presentation in the 10th ward, I had to be approved by all sorts, you know, there were a number of these committees that needed to look at the slide deck, that needed to give me a green light, and they were holding it up. And it became clear to me at a certain point that they're not going to green light it. Time is running out. So I finally, you know, decided to self-censor. And I contacted the person who was probably the main authority figure over this at public health. And I said, you know what, I'm going to remove that slide. And then I got green lighted right away. And that was a self-censorship move on my part because I wanted to go ahead and do the presentation, which really wasn't about the Koch brothers British Petroleum. But what that shows is that in the Chicago Department of Public Health and other similar organizations, the one place you're not allowed to go to, except in the most soft tones, is criticism of corporate interests. And that if you do so, you're going to be censored. You could even conceivably lose a job if you fought the mayor of Chicago and, his team. And so you end up having a mentality of self-censorship. Whoever's leading the public health department knows full well there's some things I can do and talk about, and there's other things I can't. And most of the public health problems in the country are caused by corporate interests. So whether it's corporations controlling the mass media and the authority figures who preach night after night, the Sean Hannity's, Rachel Maddow's, or it's actually public health organizations having to self-censor in order to keep their jobs and their positions and the money flowing, and just not speak in realistic, very critical terms about the corporations. And I just see that as a huge problem when you get to the climate change stuff too, because these climate scientists have either been, sworn into secrecy agreements. If they work for the government, you better not say anything or else, or they've been intimidated. People like, Michael Mann, Peter Wadhams, Jason Box, and others. And so at some point, the population, in order to really get mobilized, has to confront the corporate censorship and also recognize the fallibility that we all have to easily self-censor ourselves in order to pursue our own self-interest. And I think that's one huge problem. And the other thing that, is almost amazing, I think, if you step back and think about it, is why do we have to go through all sorts of legal hurdles to get a corporation to just simply say, hey, what I'm doing is hurting a community. And I could actually put the money out and just simply correct that problem, or I could even stop doing it. And that would be a really good thing to do. But because I am totally obsessed with profits and money, and essentially it is a hoarding problem in and of itself. And I'm not going to do that. And when you look at the billionaires, nobody, and maybe some people inherit a huge amount of money, which is problematic right there. But nonetheless, if you're a billionaire and you still aren't willing to give up part of your money to solve problems or to speak out against corporate interests, it's a huge problem. I mean, in the city of Chicago, we have a number of billionaires, and you're never going. They are very happy to talk about destroying the city of Chicago employees' pension benefits to solve problems, fiscal problems that exist. But they never are going to step up and say, somebody like J.B. Pritzker, who's now running for governor, and say, I'm worth about $3.5 billion. In order to help solve the pension crisis or something else, I'm willing to kick in 50% of my wealth. I'll still be living as a billionaire and probably regain my money anyway, if normalcy prevails. But that's just something which is taboo, because if it ever does get discussed, then you're going to open up, the big door. Hey, maybe these people have some real responsibility and they need to pony up and start to talk of things in that terms. And they don't ever want to have that door opened. And they have all sorts of, beliefs and ideologies to try to protect themselves from having to address that. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And
to go back to the idea of arcology, Solari had to confront all these things. Does he want the corporations to come in, the developers to come in and build the thing? He knew that if he accepted money from the corporations, he was going to be tied to them. And he did not want to be tied with those kind of restrictions. So that's why he didn't accept that kind of money. Because, for one thing, he was a control freak, and he wanted to have complete control over the design. So he didn't allow the corporations in. I think that, what is his name? Stein, who is now the lead president. They have 4 co-presidents now at Arcosanti. And that's the only model arcology there is presently. I mean, there's some that imitate it, but I'm still looking at this as the one in the United States. They're taking like the university model to create it. I don't know. I don't think the politics have been worked out, and the politics is what limited Arcosanti from being able to at least reach 5,000 people. That needs to be discussed, why it has failed to do so, and what kind of social order is required to build an arcology. To me, I'm really turned off with the idea of Noah's Ark. That just to me is like, I'm not going back to the old testicle. And, Noah's Ark, that's one man, of course, and his family. No, that's not where I'm coming from. And you can read my feminist theory of arcology and biosphere and everything. It's online at mylovevolution.net. It's called The Gaia Religion. And that is a feminist theory of architecture. And that's where I'm coming from.
Hey,
so
Doctor,
no Noah's Ark for me. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, doctors. Mentioning Gaia, and again, it's there is a book, and I think it's just a few years old, by James Lovelock, the guy who is a major proponent of Gaia, And he is actually in that book. He does advocate for our, I guess an arcology type community. I thought he was actually talking about almost small cities actually being insulated from the climate damage that was inevitable in his mind, and that they would be climate controlled, air conditioned when necessary. Food would be grown internally, something Jason has been bringing up many times and today, and that then you would allow Earth to maybe come to go through some sort of a healing process, and of course, if that were actually feasible, what Lovelock, kind of what you're talking about, others, then going back to what Jamin was saying, maybe at the beginning or last week, about the problem with the decommissioning of the nuclear plants around the world, because unless somehow arcology was going to be fueled by the nuclear plant itself, that would be something that would have to be. There's just so many aspects to all of this, and so I just wanted to throw in, because I know James Love, when you said Gaia, I just went immediately. Oh, James Lovelock in his book is talking about creating these kind of small city.
Yeah, well, I was inspired by that. I knew Lynn Margulis, the other microbiologist that brought the theory forward, and the son, Dorian Sagan, Carl Sagan's son. And I kind of created this narrative of Gaia when I was at UMass, and that was the result of that, the Gaia religion or worldview. Some people don't like the word religion, and so thinking of it, the Gaia worldview, the Greek goddess of the earth, and from there, that's the mytho poetry that I've been promoting, and other people are certainly promoting the idea of Gaia and this new sacred relationship. And that's where my thinking has been, like this week, looking at the poison fire, Joanna Macy's terminology for the plutonium waste and the radioactive waste, the poison fire that will be with us for 10,000 generations. It's almost unthinkable how long we have to deal with this stuff. And so, she thinks that we need to go see these places as pilgrimage sites. She's got this whole idea of the nuclear power plants being places that we worship, and we talk about the poison fire, and we educate people to physics. And these arcologies are part of that sacred design. So that's where this eco-feminism comes about, is through this new sacred relationship we have with the planet, seeing it in a different way, and seeing our radioactive waste as a mirror reflection to our dark shadow, and dealing it with not in a way that we hide the shadow, but that we bring it to light and we understand it. We change our perspective of that poison that we created in the 20th century and continue to manufacture it. So, that's why looking towards feminist theology is so important, because it gets us out of the patriarchal mindset.
Maybe you wanted to talk about this, Jamin, but I guess your question that you sort of brought out to us was, what should we be aiming for? Like, what should the goal of this meeting be? And I guess Doctress is telling us that she thinks world peace and sort of a reshifting of cultural ideas. I want to say that I've mentioned that maybe talking about How Soon Is Now, Daniel Pinchbeck's book, at some point would maybe be interesting. Just to sort of say, he's got part 5 is about post-capitalism, property, money, and power. And so the 3 chapters there are possession trance, problem with property, what do we do, stewardship and use friction, the money problem, what's wrong with money, master of the universe, money is design problem, and then there's power and leadership. So I guess from what Dan was sort of saying, of getting to the point that this is sort of a problem of corporate censorship or self-censorship by individuals, it pulls us back in even to Chris Hedges, whose main point, I think the third point in those points that he made on the original thing I talked about, was just this resistance against the corporate state. And, back to, what you were talking about, Dan, too. I worked at Whole Foods at one point, and I actually got a warning. I got sent up to the head guy of that branch, that location, and I was reported by one of my fellow employees, and this was leading up to the election, the second election of Barack Obama. And I just was sort of mentioning that I voted third party because, Obama didn't really keep his promises, and the Democrat-Republican paradigm seemed like a bunch of BS. And so basically I scared these people. Like, I kind of really upset some people, obviously, enough that they went and reported me to management. And they gave me an actual warning, which if you get 3 of these warnings, your job is terminated. And I just, so then I've heard, I got the sound clip of Chomsky in my ear too, of him talking about, this, we live in this democratic society, but the second you clock into work, you check your democratic rights at the fucking door. You can't go into your place of work if you have a regular job, if you work at frickin', anywhere, and start talking negatively about, the corporate interests, like Dan said. And so, I guess if we wanted to get to your idea of the utopian, and, I even had the idea of the Mother Earthers religion, where it was just almost saying exactly what you're saying about the Gaia religion, sort of just saying that humanity should come together instead of fighting each other in different nation states and competing for global dominance. And we realize that this fight for dominance is destroying the planet, like in Chomsky's Hegemony or Survival, he talks about this idea. And that, we really need to get people to work together towards a common goal of saving humanity or life on Earth from...
Exactly.
I guess what Jamin is saying is that there is a sense, and maybe Jamin and I or something, we need to just keep that talk to like a separate channel where we're talking about what if we don't make it through. So I see that there's sort of this split, I guess. And we could just keep this time to talking about that world awakening, creating that world awakening. And one suggestion for next week's topic could be this part 5 of Pinchbeck, How Soon Is Now, where he talks about getting rid of money, because I see the corporate system, corporate interests, their control of the government, their control of the media, their control of acceptable opinions. They generate the authority figures that Dan talks about. These are the hurdles that are in the way, and they're absolutely massive. And that's why people like Guy McPherson just say, well, fuck it. And so, so it'd be interesting to have a conversation about how to end the corporate state, how to fight the corporate state.
I really wanted to, I'm not in a position at Arcosani to do this, but have a conference there on the economics of anarchology. The economics of how do you build it, and then what kind of internal economics would bring about a fair society. You know, that's like really, really important to know how that would function. And certainly with a digital currency, I think the possibility of making it very fair is there, and using automation to liberate people's work so they can be creative. The technology is present. You know, what we need is this test site more than anything else that I can see.
Listen, I have to get going, so I'm going to check out. I really appreciate this discussion, you know, and very, very, very interesting kinds of input. So I'm going to say goodbye for this week, and I really look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday, regular time. I'm going to check out, I'm going to read, I did start that book, How Soon Is Now. I didn't get to those chapters that you're mentioning, Jason, but I will read them this week and, you know, just be up to speed on that. So look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.
Great. Look forward to seeing you, Dan. I hope you can watch the remainder of this recording between now and then.
I will.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. All right. See you soon. See you next week. Take care. All right. We've been recording and broadcasting for over an hour and a half now, and we've covered the first two topics on the agenda. I would like to talk on the third topic on the agenda, Noah's Arcology, for just a few minutes anyway, maybe 10 minutes or so. Because it dovetails with a lot of the things that we've also been talking about, you know, what is a viable strategy to get from where we are now with all the imperfections and dysfunction of the world to someplace where we might want to get to. So I thought I'd first do a screen share and just kind of share the basic concept that I'm proposing that we consider. So let's say this circle here on the screen, whoops, let me get it back up. Let's say this represents Mother Earth. And right now, just very cartoon-like, I'll just draw that, you know, Mother Earth is being overheated, and I'll just draw this as kind of like this growing red band. I'm just kind of starting it at the equator. But the heat is spreading, and it's wiping out life. We're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. So we're overheating, and it's spreading. The death zone is spreading. Again, this is very cartoon-like, oversimplified. And so my thought is that before the death zone spreads and engulfs all of Mother Earth, including all organisms, species, ecosystems, life support systems, that we concentrate resources. I'll just draw them as these little blue dots. We concentrate resources in a number of arcologies. And doctors, to your earlier comment, I just want to acknowledge, I learned the term arcology from you, no one else, you. And the very first things I learned about the concept of arcology, I learned from you. Subsequently, I spoke with Michael Gosney, learned a bit more, did some reading, learned a bit more, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to acknowledge you for that, Doctress, absolutely, because you've been working on this for decades, whereas I'm a relative newcomer to the topic. So we, broadly speaking, a bunch of us, including yourself, have been talking about a network of arcologies, and we've got certain ideas in common and others diverge. But my basic idea is that before this wave of red death spreads throughout the entire planet, let's carve out and actually build some weather-resistant arcologies for numerous purposes, some of which we touched on last week. But, among the purposes are to, get rid of the nuclear power plants. I'll just draw a little cooling tower here, right? Get rid of the nuclear power plants and save as much of life on Earth as we possibly can, so that these arcologies become stewards of life of ecosystems, of species. And in addition to shutting down nuclear power plants and doing other benevolent actions to clean up our mess, so that as abrupt climate change continues to progress, we at least carve out certain, of these arcologies in which to preserve some form of life, preserve and steward some form of life. And the emphasis is definitely not on human life, though humans will play a crucial part. I don't know of any other organisms that have the tools or knowledge to shut down nuclear power plants other than humans. So that's one big reason to keep humans alive, but not the only reason. And so my thought is that if we can get a global movement going to start these arcologies, which in any formulation of survival that we've been talking about, arcologies play a key role. Then what we can do is, through this movement and through these positive actions of actually building arcologies, starting with 1, starting with 10, starting with whatever number, and that's a very important discussion, we can help wake the world up so that they can see, wow, people are actually doing something. And so, I, as part of this kind of marketing campaign, we came up last week, I and my girlfriend came up with this concept of Noah's Arcology as a brand. And I know not everyone likes Noah or the Bible or Christianity or all that, and that's all fair. This is just something that I think a lot of people could say, wow, Noah's Ark, Noah's Arcology, I get it. It kind of makes it easy for folks to be able to map to.
Well, it's very patriarchal, and I can't even believe your girlfriend would even want that. As far as, like, look at that image. It's got Noah up there, the patriarch, and holding his little stick, and he's the boss, and here comes all the animals. You don't even have oh, there's the girlfriend. She's down there bringing the water, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, Jamin. We just think differently. That's all.
That's fair, doctors. That's totally fair. And by the way, this isn't meant to be some final image of what the concept is. This is just kind of a conceptual idea. So the idea from a communication standpoint of communicating to the world, there's a group of us that are working on this, and this is the vision to build these arcs all over planet Earth. Building off of the model of Arcosanti and Biosphere 2 and so many other models that have been designed, conceived, some actually built partially or completely, others that are just conceptual. But there's all these visions of arcology all over the world that are being developed, some, water-based floating arcologies, others that are land-based. But, just really start the conversation of arcology, right? Because that's a word that most people don't even know about. So we need to get the concept out there. We need to start building some experimental prototypes, so that we bring this whole concept of arcology into the global consciousness, and then as we do that, I think one of the major benefits is we get this story out there of abrupt climate change, but it's the story of abrupt climate change paired with a solution or a set of solutions centered around a planetary network of arcologies to achieve all these benevolent aims that we keep talking about. And I think that as we develop a global community talking about this network of arcologies under whatever banner, I'm just proposing Noah's Arcology as one that, that your common person could be able to map to with their, their understanding of the story from the Bible of Noah's Ark, which everyone knows about. So that could potentially be a great accelerator. But I'm open to discussing whatever branding concepts. But the point is that we get a planetary movement to discuss and explore and design and build these as one vital component to global transformation. I actually think that might have a very good possibility of waking people up, because if people see that others are actually building, arcologies to save life on Earth, and they actually see this action being taken, that'll wake people up and say, wow, just think back to the story of the Bible when Noah and family and friends started building their ark. I mean, that was quite a spectacle. Here they are building this big wooden ark on dry land, and so many people are laughing at them and other people are helping. But, you know, it really got the word out. So likewise, if we start building our ecologies and talking about the vision and talking about the problem of abrupt climate change, hopefully that can get more people engaged in the discussion. And then as we build out the concepts and do some prototypes, there are lots of possibilities for getting funding to expand this out even further. And then that starts a whole discussion about, well, you know, who's going to be in versus who's going to be out of these arcologies. And then that maps to the conversation of survival in the face of abrupt climate change and makes it even more of a hot topic. Well, if only certain people are going to be in, then, whoa, well, that's not democratic. That's not fair. Well, you know, then that can possibly lead to a conversation of what can we do at the level of the entire planet to heal and protect planet Earth from the ravages of abrupt climate change and the sixth mass extinction, you know, such as, for example, geoshading, right? Dismantling the military, having a revolution in politics, a revolution in culture, feeding the world, and transforming agriculture, transforming land use, transforming ocean use, et cetera, et cetera. So many things that we can do. But I think that this concept that there is a population in the world, a community, a global community that's working on the building of these arcologies to preserve some life on Earth, as much of life as possible, and to clean up as much of our mess as possible, that may be the conversation that really wakes people up and says, wow, you know, first I need to think about, am I going to be, you know, do I have a lifeboat in the face of abrupt climate change and mass extinction? And, you know, but from that, we can then expand it to, hey, can we transform our entire planet into a lifeboat through such measures as geoshading, holistic land management, et cetera? And so you see how this is a strategy where, you know, this conceives of a pathway of conversations that might lead us to much bigger projects than a limited set of arcologies in which only, if, you know, a small fraction of humanity survives and a fraction of life survives. Can we do some larger scale things? But we need to start that conversation somewhere. And that's where I think that the building of arcologies and the communication of arcologies, talking about, showcasing I hadn't even heard of Arcosanti until I'd met you, Doctress. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, let me learn about that. And then I met Michael Gosney. So
yeah, but have you read any of Solari's work? Have you gone there? Have you looked at it? Have you talked to what's his name? Jeff Stein, the presidents? You know, that's the thing. If you really want to get involved with this, it seems like your next step is to come, look at them, get involved, see what they did wrong, see what you could, what this project would need to do in order to correct the mistakes that these places made. You know, I know what it seems like to me, and I have been taught, I mean, what you're outlining is something that I've outlined a long time ago. You know, these aren't that different ideas that I have been doing. And unfortunately, you know, like when I went to see you in Seattle, you never really asked me about arcologies or my ideology of it. You were so concerned with Jamin being out there, you know, with your sign about the drug cartels, that you never really got to know what I was thinking and my whole ideology about this. And now you've taken it on and you've said it's Noah's Ark and you're the king. And that pisses me off. And I'm trying to contain the energy of being pissed off about it. And I invited you here. I invited 4 months ago. I said, you know, come to Arcosanti. Come and visit me here. You just disregarded it. You didn't even tell me. You weren't going to even come, you know, just like completely And now you're taking on the damn ideas. And I'm glad you are. Maybe you can do a lot better than me in promoting them. But it's the same damn thing. But you're a white guy, and you are a lot more powerful than me, so go for it.
I mean, I think that Jamin's just referring to our college maybe in a different manner. I think he likes to have you here to keep us all thinking in the perspective.
He's got the ideas now. You've got the basic ideas I've been talking about for the last, I don't know how many months, you know. And if you're going to run with something like Noah's Ark and you're going to market it and all this, at least you're not talking about the drug cartels anymore as the way to make this change happen. And there's a whole alumni system that has dealt with our colleges. There's like, 7,000 people. There are architects that have been thinking about this, that all could join in. And there's another whole generation of architects that are dealing with these issues.
I think Jamin's saying that that's the exact same thing that we're talking about. We want to get the people who are interested in creating arcs.
Right. And I tried, yeah, but
so let me state something else too, though. This is why people who really believe Guy McPherson's message, or this is Guy McPherson's message coming out, you're almost saying like, tons of people who have been working on this their whole lives.
Yeah.
And it's the point that none of that's been able to stop us from hitting the point of no return, basically.
Yeah, but I don't feel like it's cooperative with me. I feel like a power issue here. And I don't like these feelings. I don't like it. And that's why, I'm working to, let go. Nobody can copyright ideas, thank goodness. So, I give my ideas out for freely. I've had a television show on our colleges, that are posted on my YouTube. I've written a dissertation about it, Guy, that I bet you haven't read. There's just, I don't know.
Well,
and it just is it's just a pisser.
Well, I think where Jamin is at, and where some of us may be at, is that we realize that it's almost too late for the living world. And at this point, if we're going to even talk about human survival, I mean, I think Jamin's almost a little optimistic on how many animal species we could keep alive inside this biosphere too, or whatever. I think.
Yeah, it's possible. Look, it's never been done before. If there was the right power structure and the right organization, there is this audience already familiar with these terms. There's this place in Arizona where they have tried to come together to build it. And it's like 1% complete. They're Michael Gosney. He tried to build a model in Northern California. I've forgotten what it's called, Cala something. I never thought the name was that catchy. But, there needs to be research on these things, or, how do we do it? How do we do it? And I would like to be part of a team doing it. But I don't want to be part of a patriarchal team doing it.
So you
because I've already done that. I've already tried to work with Solari. And that was a patriarchy. Patriarchy doesn't do it. That's what we can figure out. Having the guy Noah up here with his stick, his staff, doesn't do it.
So doctors, you've raised a lot of really good points. I think this is kind of at the heart of what's keeping us as humanity back. There's patriarchy. There's, if I may, Jason, this will just take me a moment. There's patriarchy. There's individuals wanting to be in control and their egos wanting to be in control. And then other people get really turned off by that. So, how do we overcome these issues of individual power, individual ego, individual control, and patriarchy poisoning what could be a really awesome project? Because, many of us, yourself, you've just mentioned you want to be a part of a team. I want to be a part of a team working on this. I think there are a lot of people who do. So how do we do that? How do we get there from here? How do we form this team, this planetary community that says, let's organize ourselves around egalitarian principles, democratic principles, where we actually, I'm a big fan of anarchy, where we don't even have leaders at all. We don't have rulers, but we do have rules. So how do we develop, the kind of structure, the kind of organization? How do we do that? Right.
I think it's certainly not by marketing Noah, who was the leader. So that certainly wasn't an anarchy.
So you weren't here, but I did. I was critical also of the name Noah's Arcology because I said it made a reference to one theocracy, one religion, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't want anybody to, if I'm part of something, I didn't want it to necessarily have Noah's name or reference the Bible. But so the question is, are you upset and think now he's violating some patriarchal things because he's called it Noah's Arcology, or are you upset because you feel like Jamin is running either this show or whatever we want to call this with an iron fist, like a true patriarch?
No, I don't think he's running with the iron fist. However, the control of the media is certainly his, and he's always the one that introduced the show.
All right. Well,
it's on his YouTube.
I'm thinking about opening my own YouTube channel so that I can talk just like Sam Bloom talks and Jamin talks. Yeah. I suggest you definitely open your own and get your ideas out there.
Well, I do. I do Facebook.
I like having you here for your feedback, but I don't know if it's necessarily productive for us to go off on a tangent where we all seem like we can't even get along on a basic level. Then this becomes completely unproductive. But I guess, maybe I could mention, that my ideas for growing food, were if we could figure out, like, have you guys heard of Farm in a Box? It comes in a big shipping container, and some guys have recently doing a GoFundMe to get a whole aquaponic system into a shipping container that then breaks out and has all the parts. So I was mixing in my mind the idea of Jabowski, that guy is who talks about open source ecology, the open source ecology group, and being able to have like 3D printers inside of these things. So literally these cargo ships could just be dropped off in like Puerto Rico, for instance, where people don't have food, and within a few months they could up and get some food production running, sustainable local food production running. For instance, this would be one way to have a bunch of these then boxes to help feed the world, I think is one perfect way towards making the collapse we know is coming more friendly in the fact that people aren't all starving at least. And I figured if shit really does hit the fan and at least you have the ship, you have the ability to keep some people alive. From a moral standpoint, if you're going to try to break down the nuclear power plants, you need to keep nuclear physicists and stuff like that alive. Those maybe are more important people than people who don't have any knowledge of anything, let alone any education. That's where I was getting on sort of a moral sense. But I would say that this way, creating this type of idea, you don't have to talk about it as this arc. Like the end of the world's coming, so we're building this arc. You just say, we're going to build a ship, and every shipping container on the ship would be able to be dropped off someplace, and it's open source, ecology, they pull it out and they can grow their own food. And this, if we distribute these around places in the world that are having problem growing enough food for their populations, it's a good thing. So then people can fund this type of a project. And, you know, but if shit did hit the fan, you'd have, you know, food for more people. And that's sort of more an open idea of world peace in my mind. That was one thing I was thinking of when, you know, the Ark came to mind. Sort of a different vision from what Jamin's vision was. On another note, I think that it would, like I keep saying, it'd be great for us to have a test site, but we live in different areas. So one article I just found was about Long Beach. In California, they passed a law that says that they give a tax break to landowners who have empty lots if they use that empty lot for an urban farm. And so I all of a sudden thought, well, I've been thinking about how do I get physical land to start any sort of project. I think it'd be a great thing for me to look into how to get a place, because in Long Beach now they made a Long Beach wide thing where they're going to charge $53 a month to every plot of land that's empty. An additional, so they can hire a bureaucrat to go around and manage this program, drive around in a car and pay for his gas while he checks to make sure, look at all the lots and see that they don't have farms growing on them. It seems like kind of a ridiculous scheme, but at least if you go to all these people with these empty lots and say, hey, do you really want this fucking guy coming around and collecting $53 from you a month on this stupid crap? And maybe you can get some tax benefits, then maybe some land could be acquired to start at least the growing food portion of an ecology, because I feel like you talk about our ecologies a lot. You know, I think that food is the pressing issue. Is how are people going to eat if the temperature shoots up by 4, 8, 10 degrees Celsius?
Well, I'm going to go after I say this, but yeah, I mean, if you look at Solari's designs, he has a greenhouse attached to the model, and the greenhouse heats and cools the arcology. So it is part of the design. It's not something outside the design. The two things,
like an Earthship, which I also Earthships,
yeah,
which you like.
Ships are like that too, you know, but they're not.
And I totally agree. It would be nice if we could remake every house in the country, but we obviously don't have a consensus on the most basic things.
Yeah, but if you read my dissertation, you'll see that, I mean, it's a different archetype in architecture. And the way that archetypes shift is through climate change. This is how it happened before when we went out of the caves. So, architecture, it takes a lot to change architecture. And it's our relationship with nature that changes it. So anyway, I am going to go because I'm finishing my paper and I have to spend time doing it.
All right.
And I want to thank both of you for sticking it out and listening to my rants.
Can I say one more thing before you leave? Because it has to do directly with you. I feel like you kind of feel like there needs to be this test site so we can figure it out perfectly, the actual structure of how it works, before we can actually move on and distribute the idea throughout the entire world to save everybody. But maybe we don't have the time for that, to wait for the perfect solutions. We have to start working from somewhere, you know? And I think the thing that I first read that you missed when we got here, if you mind if I just read this one paragraph before you leave, it's just a Howard Zinn quote. I don't know if you like Howard Zinn at all, but it says, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic," historian Howard Zinn wrote. "It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live in defiance of all that is bad around us is itself a marvelous victory. So I think you did a good job switching over to your solar panels. At least you took an individual action, and I mean, we all have to do our little parts to come together into a whole.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we're going to get a perfect footprint for an arcology and actually spread that one all over the world. We got to start from somewhere, and growing food is the way I think that could be one.
I think that we also need a planetary vision, and Buckminster Fuller, he's one of the people that I look for, and then Jacques Fresco is the other one who were dealing with arcology concepts and a planetary system. So that's the people that I am bringing forth in my papers, and I'm really happy that these people existed and that we have this knowledge to see holistically. Who's going to bring it forth? I don't know. I'm going to do my best to deliver my vision, and maybe people will want to say, and then add to it, like some kind of collaboration in the vision. And I mean, if Jamin and you and I had a perfect relationship or a good relationship, perhaps that kind of collaboration could exist. I think right now, it's very hard, Jamin, because I mean, I've asked for processing with you, and that never happened. And you're very headstrong. You've got your vision, and you're going to do it. And you're going to bring in, your girlfriend to do it. And so anyway, I'm leaving now.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Good to see you, Doctors. Well, I think just to recap what Doctors just said, what I just heard is she wants the vision to start with her vision, and that other people can add to that, but she really wants it to be the starting point and the center to be her vision, and that other people can then join her vision. That would work for her.
I think she's also saying that anything that we seem to say is a patriarchal vision or something. She makes me feel like anytime I talk, I must be advocating a patriarchal society or something. But
well, yeah, I've had the experience that anytime I say anything, I get kind of a bunch of anger back, and I get chastised for not following her vision. What I'd really love to see is a place where we can come together and each of us can contribute our own visions, our own ideas, and pull in visions and ideas from other people, so that there doesn't have to be like a leader. It's not like, Doctress and Utopia's vision or Jamin's vision that leads the whole thing. Let's just come together and talk about this. Right.
Yeah. Talk about, like, if we're doing our own activist work in different areas, then, we can talk about our successes and whatnot. I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, I think there's, a thing going on there too, where, I mean, I think one of the reasons people say it's hopeless is because there's 3 or 4 of us on here, and we can't sometimes seem to agree on things and start fighting over BS like patriarchy or like some other crap, like about the name of Noah's Ark or what, like, who fucking cares? But, like, you know, and then talk about a planetary vision and spreading this planetary vision. I mean, can you imagine coming to the rest of the people of the world and be like, okay, so we've got the vision, we've got the set blueprints that you should follow if you want to survive in the future. And people are gonna be like, are you fucking crazy? Get out of here. We're not following your shit. So who are you? You know? And so it brings up that, the people who can see the catastrophe and the collapse coming may be the only ones who can band together and even keep humanity going or life in any way going. I mean, maybe the only thing they can really, keep going in a biosphere 2 or biosphere 3 that they're going to create to save life on Earth is humans, enough food and plants to keep them going, let alone, I don't know, maybe they could keep some chickens and simple, husbandry type things that can help the human race. But, you want to talk about creating an ecology. They tried creating that seed bank, right? In freaking Iceland or wherever. And the thing's already freaking leaking. It's like built in the ice and all the ice is melting. You want to kind of say, like, did they put any forethought into this shit? Like, oh, we're going to put it in this ice and it's still going to be there in millions of years. And it's like, no, the fucking ice is melting. And so, my friend, the brain, pointed out to me that it's like, no matter how much you want to mule over this, it seems like getting the masses behind doing one of Peter Wadham's refreezing projects and cutting the military budget. I mean, that should be one goal. I mean, the global awakening should be one goal that we talk about. And maybe this is the show where we talk about how do we get a global awakening going on? And then we can have the other show where we can talk about, hey, well, fuck, if that doesn't work and some of us still want to live, even if it has to be inside closed containers, let's talk about that, right?
And actually, I bring the two together because I think that actually building arcologies and talking about arcologies and, putting a meme out there, Noah's arcology or something like that wakes people up and says, whoa, I get it. Okay. I may not agree with it, but I get it. Okay, I'm listening. Maybe I'm laughing at it. But I think that's actually one really powerful way of achieving a global awakening is that if people see that other people are building arcs to survive, and have.
So I could ask you, what did you think of my basic idea here? I mean, I thought that having a boat full of shipping containers that could just drop these things off that would be self-contained and can just sort of grow food.
Yeah. No, I think that would be great in a constant climate, a relatively constant climate with the normal oscillations. But right now we're in abrupt climate change, so we're rapidly.
I'm saying a way to sell it to people who aren't fucking awake yet is to say that you're going to feed the world. Maybe you finish the project in 3 or 5 or 8 years from now, right? And by that time, there may be billions of people starving in the world already, and at that point you just be like, oh well, now we're starving, so we'll just feed ourselves. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't know. That's what's so difficult about us even coming to discuss this is because we are going on a time frame that we're not completely sure about, right? But all I'm saying is that if we're talking about making the collapse not as bad, having food to eat would be a requirement. No one's
absolutely
about patriarchy or capitalism or any of these isms or any of this bullshit. If you could feed them a fucking meal and ask them to work for you, taking down this nuclear power plant. Here, we set up this arcology. You can come in here. You need to work 30 hours a week. And yeah, you got to go into some dangerous environments, but it's all in the name of trying to salvage and mitigate climate change and salvage this situation to some degree. And then you can join this group, but you're kind of, by joining, you are required to work and do something to make the group live. Because I think if there's going to be groups of people in the future who live, they're all going to have to work. There won't be able to be space for people who aren't productive uses of human flesh.
Exactly. Exactly.
The Soylent Green maybe still going on outside. I mean, Mad Max may still be like going on outside if like people are productively doing something inside of an arcology that's sealed off from the rest of the world.
No, and that's the basic idea, because the way I see it shaking down is, as you know, the global temperature adds another 10 degrees C, and it wipes out most of life on Earth. You're going to have people starving and fighting and stealing from each other and cannibalism and who knows what else outside the arcologies. The idea is that the arcologies would be buffered from that. And beyond being buffered from that, would actually have the capability of doing really, really meaningful projects in the world, like shutting down nuclear power plants. So that's the idea. And so the real life or death question is, how do we get humanity organized to pursue one of these strategies or multiple? How do we get together and do anything other than fight? Right? I mean, here we are coming together with a lot of shared common understanding, common values, common vision, and look how often we end up fighting.
But you agree, right? That's part of what Guy McPherson is saying. It's like, look, he'll probably at some point, he's even going to point to this group and be like, look at this group that Jamin made. They can't even fucking agree on the way to save the fucking planet Earth. So, you know, I mean, it's just like, sometimes I do think it's freaking hopeless. But, you know, that's the thing, is I think, I don't know. I mean, every person you meet, there's a different idea in their head, obviously, right? And
yeah, I mean, it just you know, I start to propose an idea for a few minutes, and doctors can't even contain herself. She's saying, "Fuck you, Jamin, I hate you." Blah blah blah. You should be following my idea. You should be following me. Shut up and follow me. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing.
Well, and you're, yeah.
I mean. Well, anyway, look, and one of the ideas of radical collective intelligence is that people get together and collaborate with who they want to, right? And people will see through the recorded video conferences, you know, who's capable of collaboration and sharing and working together, and who's not, and people self-select. You know, this group is kind of one of the starting points of that, just sort of as an experiment, but it's really highlighting that. Humanity's got some problems when it comes to working together, collaborating, co-creating. So anyway, lots of fascinating ideas on the table. The you know, not the $1 million question or even the $1 trillion question, but the life or death question is, can we get it together in time? Can we get something together in time to save some of life and preserve life on planet Earth so that it can rebound, perhaps without humanity, in the event that we go extinct? But before we go extinct, what can we do together? What can we do that's meaningful? That's the question I keep coming to the table with. Noah's Arcology is my latest incarnation of an answer. If you'd asked me a few years ago, it was all about community cafes and feeding the world. If you'd asked me a few months ago, it was all about geoshading and how do we buy some extra time. So anyway, I'm going to keep trying till my dying breath because I don't know what else to do.
I mean, you're making this natural progression that, you know, in a few weeks or months, you're going to do just like Guy McPherson. You're going to be like, fuck it, man. Fuck it. It's over, man. There's no fucking hope. I feel like that's the downward spiral you're going on. So I hope that, you know, maybe some people watching want to participate in, you know, even if it's just making life a little better in the collapsing world around us. Like, even just, you know, maybe not being the guy who murders all your neighbors to steal their food, and being the guy who grows enough to share with your neighbors. Like, be that guy and not, you know, the former. I mean, these are things that are worth getting together and talking about. I mean, I think everybody should be growing food. I guess I literally feel like you should be figuring out how to grow. Everybody should know how to grow food in a closed caption environment. I mean, I've seen the biosphere stuff that she's talking about how they're planning on, they have this capsule there that they've said that this capsule, it's not very big, but, you know, but it can grow all the food that one astronaut needs to live on the surface of Mars for blah long, you know. But that's, in a way, that's sort of what I'm talking about. I've even looked up how many plants they think it would really take to keep, you know, the air inside a sealed container viable for one human to breathe, and it's between 300 and 500. So you'd probably want to keep at least 500 per person. But then obviously you'd probably want machinery, because in a space shuttle, I'm assuming there's, you know, obviously mechanical things help them balance the atmosphere inside, and control pressure. So I mean, if you're literally thinking about then having a society living in sort of a sealed off way, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to consider that's very different than if you're building an arcology on the surface of modern day Earth or Earth of 50 years ago. So, I mean, the stuff that Buckminster Fuller and Jack Fresco talk about, why that's all nice and dandy, right? If people can't breathe the air and trees die outside, how are we going to survive? The only way would be sealed off somehow. And it's not like we'll be able to really pull that together last minute. We need a plan. We need people thinking about, we need 500 plants per fucking person. And, you know, it's like she mentioned Yucca Mountain at one point. I've kind of thought about this as another thing. You know, one company actually bought up all these bunkers, these military bunkers in like South Dakota or something. I don't know if you've read about that. And now they sell them for like $1 million or you pay, I think, $1,000 rent a month, but you have to pay it all up front for the next 100 years. And you buy your own little bunker, and then you can start stocking your food. And they're supposed to have like a community center that everybody can maybe, I guess, reach somehow through tunnels, or I don't know, and a security force and all this stuff. So, I mean, they're making it for the rich, I guess, you know. Yeah, we're talking about trying to make something for, that's where I'm saying, like, if we're trying to make something for the poor, if you don't move fast enough and create the stuff for everyone, you come to that moral decision in the end. Well, who gets to go? Right? So
yeah. Homer Simpson gets to stay in the arcology because he's got skills for dismantling a nuclear power plant, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And then we build from there. I mean, we're going to need biologists, ecologists, botanists, psychologists. We're going to need all kinds of areas of expertise. And it's, you know, it's certainly not going to be fair, but I mean, we're in this crisis point where abrupt climate change is happening. No one's talking about it. And we need something to jolt humanity awake, or jolt awake enough of us that we can form a planetary movement and do something meaningful in the time that's left.
Yeah. Well, I mean, every time there's like a fire or these massive hurricanes, I think we all keep hoping. You're looking through all the news articles, right? You're like, oh my gosh, please let there have been a mass awakening of people who all of a sudden just decided to switch sides on us, you know, like went from being complete deniers to, all right, we're ready to listen to you. Fuck, you know, like, but it never happens, you know, and it's really, other people talk about the state of this country. I mean, the amount of lying that our president does and just the misinformation campaigns of everything. I don't know. Like, I love the idea of this utopian view that everybody's going to be saved, but I don't even think they want to be fucking saved. I don't think they can, because they can't even open their fucking minds. They can't change their system. You know, and a lot of people, I think, are going to be maybe like Dan, be like, oh, I'm going to lose my cell phone and the ability to go to the store and buy food and my access to these mood balancing medication that I take on a regular basis. Fuck it. I'd rather shoot myself in the head. Anyways, I guess I'm just going off on tangents now. But it's fun to just talk and go off on tangents with you, though.
Thank you.
All right. Well, should we cut this to an end, or what do you?
Yep, that sounds good. All right, so we'll pick it up next week. If you want to hang out for a few more minutes, I'll be here, but I'll stop the broadcast now. But first, let me thank you, Jason, Doctors Newtopia, Dan, all of our live viewers, and all the folks who watch this after the fact. Thank you so much for watching and hanging in there with us. And please jump into the conversation and invite yourself in so that you can be one of these happy people. Cranking out ideas and sometimes getting stuff thrown in your face on our show. So the doors are open. Love to have you, and because we got to figure something out, and we're not going to do it alone and isolated. We need to get together. So thank you, Jason. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.